The morning shift bell rang across Cathara station like it had for the past 20 years. Workers from different worlds moved through the corridors, heading to their jobs in the asteroid mines. The Veltar people, with their crystal-like skin, walked slowly but steadily. The Quinn, looking like giant frogs, hopped between the metal walkways. The four-armed Thek carried heavy equipment with ease. Commander Velona stood in the main control room, watching the daily reports come in. 50,000 people called this place home. They had built something special here, a place where different species worked together, far from the politics and wars of the inner worlds. "Another good day," said Kor, the chief engineer. His four arms worked on 3 different control panels at once. "The new mining equipment is working perfectly. We'll exceed our monthly quota by 15%. Velona nodded. Her crystal skin changed color slightly, a sign of contentment among her people. "Send the reports to the Trade Council. They'll be pleased." That's when everything changed. The long-range sensors began screaming. Emergency lights flashed red across every deck. In the space around them, reality seemed to tear open like fabric. Dark shapes poured through the holes in space, ships that looked more like living creatures than machines. "What are those?" whispered Dr. Lyra, the station's head scientist. Her Quinn eyes, designed to see in dark water, could make out details others couldn't. They're alive." The ships were massive, each one bigger than Cathara Station itself. Their hulls pulsed like beating hearts. Strange tentacles writhed from their sides. Biomechanical weapons grew from their surfaces like tumors. These were the Ravager ships, nightmares that had destroyed entire star systems. "Red alert," Velona shouted. "All civilians to emergency shelters, security teams to battle stations." But, even as she gave the orders, she knew it was hopeless. Cathara Station had 3 small patrol ships and some mining vessels with basic weapons. The Ravager fleet had 30 warships, each one capable of cracking a planet. The first Ravager ship moved closer. It was so large it blocked out the stars. A voice came through the communication system. Not words, but something that went straight into their minds. It felt like ice and death and endless hunger. "Surrender," the voice said. "Your organic matter will feed us. Your technology will serve us. You have 72 hours to prepare for harvest." Elder Bryn, an old Quinn philosopher, began to shake. "I've heard stories," he whispered. "They don't just kill you. They consume everything. Your body, your memories, even your soul." The Ravager ship spread out around the station, forming a perfect circle. There was no escape. Long-range communications were being jammed. No one could send for help. Captain Reed of the patrol ship Defender tried to sound brave. "Station command, we're moving to intercept. Maybe we can buy you some time." "Negative, Captain," Velona replied. "Your ships are needed to defend the civilian areas. We'll try to find another way." But there was no other way. Everyone knew it. The first attack came 6 hours later. It wasn't meant to destroy, just to show what the Ravagers could do. A single beam of energy struck the outer mining platform. The entire structure, big enough to house 10,000 people, simply vanished. It didn't explode or break apart. It just stopped existing. Panic spread through the station like wildfire. Families hugged each other in the emergency shelters. Children cried. The elderly prayed to gods from a dozen different worlds. In the control room, Velona and her staff worked desperately. They sent distress signals in every direction, hoping someone might hear them. The nearest military base was 3 weeks away at maximum speed. Even if help was coming, it would arrive too late. "Ma'am," said Communications Officer Vale. "I'm picking up old emergency broadcasts from other systems. The Ravagers hit the Centauri colonies last month. 15 million dead. Before that, it was the Rigel trading posts. They're moving through this entire sector." The hours crawled by. The Ravager ships just waited like predators watching their prey. Sometimes they would move closer just to watch the station's defenders scramble. It was a game to them. Dr. Lyra worked in her lab, trying to find some weakness in the Ravager bioships. "Their hulls regenerate damage," as she reported. "They seem to be part machine, part living tissue. I've never seen anything like it. Core was in the engineering sections trying to boost the station's shields, but the power systems were designed for mining operations, not warfare. We might be able to hold them off for a few hours once they start their real attack, he said. But that's all. 24 hours passed, then 48. The Ravagers didn't attack again, they just waited, letting the fear build. Psychological warfare. They wanted their prey to be broken in spirit before the harvest began. On the second day, the station's children asked their parents hard questions. Why don't the humans help us? Asked a young tech girl. They have the strongest ships. The adults looked at each other uncomfortably. Everyone knew about humans, but they also knew humans didn't get involved in other species' problems. Humans were dangerous, maybe more dangerous than the Ravagers themselves. Humans only care about human interests, explained Elder Bryn. They won't risk themselves for us. But some of the older workers remembered stories. Captain Reed had served in the border wars years ago. I saw a human ship once, he said quietly. It was damaged, drifting after a battle. Even broken, it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. The weapons on that ship could have destroyed our entire system. They say human ships can ignore physics, added Engineer Vale, that they move at impossible speeds, survive direct hits from planet-killer weapons. Stories, said Core. Just stories to scare children. But they weren't just stories, and everyone knew it. The humans had appeared in the galaxy 50 years ago from somewhere beyond the outer rim. They had technology that made no sense. They fought wars with an intensity that scared even the warrior races. And they won. They always won. The problem was, humans didn't care about anyone but humans. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Felona stood in the observation deck, looking out at the Ravager fleet. The bioships were beautiful in their own terrible way, like living nightmares floating in the void. No help is coming, she said to herself. We're going to die here. She was wrong about that. Help was coming, but it wouldn't be the kind of help anyone expected. The second night on Cathara Station was the longest anyone could remember. In the emergency shelters, families huddled together while the Ravager ships waited outside like hungry wolves. Sleep was impossible. Every small sound made people jump. In Shelter 7, Elder Bryn sat with a group of youngsters who couldn't stop asking questions. The old Quinn's webbed hands shook as he tried to comfort them, but his own fear was hard to hide. Tell us about the humans again, whispered a young Veltar girl named Kira. Her crystal skin was pale with terror. Are they really as strong as the stories say? Bryn looked around the shelter. Parents nodded at him. Anything to distract the children from their situation. He cleared his throat and began to speak in his old croaking voice. 50 years ago, the humans came from the dark space beyond the rim, he said. Nobody knew they existed. The first contact was at Proxima Gate, a trading station like ours but bigger. The children moved closer. Even some adults stopped their quiet conversations to listen. A pirate fleet attacked Proxima Gate, Bryn continued. 40 ships, led by the notorious Captain Vex. The station called for help, but the nearest patrol was days away. Everyone thought they were doomed. He paused, remembering. Then a single human ship appeared. Just one ship against 40 pirates. The pirates laughed and demanded surrender. The human captain's response was unusual. What did he say? Asked. Kira, he said, you have 30 seconds to leave. This is your only warning. Bryn's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The pirates attacked. All 40 ships opened fire at once. The human ship, it did something impossible. Core, the four-armed engineer, had been listening from across the shelter. His voice was rough with emotion. I was there, he said quietly, working as a junior mechanic on Proxima Gate. Everyone turned to stare at him. Core had never mentioned being at one of the famous human battles. The human ship was called the Iron Wolf, Core said. It was smaller than most of the pirate vessels, but when the shooting started, he shook his head. It moved like a living thing, faster than physics should allow. The pirates hit it with enough firepower to crack a moon, but it just kept fighting. What happened? Asked a young Thek boy. The human ship tore through them like they were made of paper, Kor replied. Its weapons. I still don't understand how they worked. Beams of pure energy that could bend around asteroids to hit targets. Missiles that seemed to think for themselves. And the ship itself. It took damage that should have killed everyone aboard, but it never stopped fighting. Bryn nodded. The battle lasted 6 days. 6 days of non-stop combat. When it was over, 39 pirate ships were destroyed. One escaped, but only because the humans let it go. Why? Asked Kira. To spread the word, said Dr. Lyra, who had been quiet until now. That's how humans fight. They don't just win, they make sure everyone knows they won. In another shelter, Captain Reed was telling his own story to a group of security officers. They needed to hear it, needed to understand what might be coming. I served in the border wars, Reed said. Saw action at the Battle of Wolf's Den. The enemy had us surrounded. 3 battle fleets against our small patrol group. We were ready to die fighting. The security officers leaned in closer. Outside, one of the Ravager ships moved, its biomechanical hull pulsing with alien life. A human destroyer showed up. Reed continued. The UHS Vengeance, I'll never forget that name. The enemy commander ordered it to surrender or be destroyed. The human response was to open fire immediately. Just 1 destroyer against 3 fleets? Asked Security Chief Tana. 1 destroyer, Reed confirmed. But it fought like a demon. The thing about human ships, they don't follow normal tactics. They don't retreat when they should. They don't surrender when they're outnumbered. They just fight until either they win or everything around them is dead. Did it win? Asked another officer. Reed was quiet for a long moment. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, 2 of the enemy fleets were completely destroyed. The 3rd fleet ran away. The human ship was so damaged it barely looked like a ship anymore, but it was still fighting. What about the crew? That's the scary part, Reed said. After the battle, we offered medical assistance. The human captain, a woman named Stone, refused. She said her crew was fine, but we could see the damage to their ship. No one should have survived what they went through. Dr. Lyra had moved to another shelter, where the older residents were sharing their own memories. The stories were always the same. Humans appearing suddenly, fighting impossible battles, winning against all odds. They say human ships can travel faster than light without using normal jump drives, said an elderly Thek merchant, that they can appear anywhere, anytime. I heard they don't feel pain like other species, added a Quinn trader, that they can fight even when they're dying. My cousin worked on a salvage crew, said another voice. They found the wreck of a human ship after a battle. The thing had been cut in half, but the crew had sealed themselves in the remaining section and kept fighting for 3 more hours. But not all the stories were about human victories. Some were darker. In the station's main corridor, maintenance worker Vale was talking to anyone who would listen. Humans don't just fight wars, he said. They perfect them. I've seen records from the Terran archives. They've been fighting each other for thousands of years before they ever left their home planet. What do you mean? Asked someone. They had wars that killed millions of their own people, Vale continued. They built weapons that could destroy their entire world. And when they finally achieved peace among themselves, they turned all that knowledge outward. The conversations continued through the night. Stories of human ships that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Tales of impossible rescues and terrible vengeance. Accounts of human technology that seemed more like magic than science. But every story ended the same way, with the humans disappearing back into the darkness, leaving others to wonder if they had imagined the whole thing. As dawn approached on the station's artificial day-night cycle, the mood began to change. The stories had given people something other than fear to think about. Some began to hope. Maybe they'll come, whispered Kira to her parents. Maybe the humans will save us. Her mother held her close. Humans don't save aliens, dear. They only care about other humans. But even as she said it, she found herself looking toward the stars, searching for any sign of salvation. In the command center, Vilona was doing the same thing. The Ravager deadline was approaching fast. In 18 hours, the harvest would begin. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a tiny hope was growing. She had sent distress signals in all directions. Maybe, just maybe, some human ship had heard them. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe help was coming after all. The final day began with silence. The Ravager ships had stopped their slow circling and now hung motionless around Cathara station, like vultures waiting for death. Their biomechanical hulls pulsed with a sickly green light, and feeding tentacles began to extend toward the station. Commander Vilona stood in the control room watching the countdown timer. 6 hours and 17 minutes remained. Around her, the command staff worked with quiet desperation, but everyone knew it was over. "Any response to our distress signals?" she asked Communications Officer Vale. Vale shook his head. "Nothing. Commander, the nearest military patrol is still 2 weeks out. Even if they left immediately when they received our first message, they won't arrive in time." Dr. Lyra looked up from her sensor readings. "The Ravager ships are moving into harvest formation. They're preparing to dock with our hull. Once those feeding tubes make contact..." She didn't need to finish. Everyone knew what happened next. The Ravagers would drain every living thing on the station, not just killing them, but consuming their memories, their dreams, their very essence. In the emergency shelters, people held each other close. Some prayed. Others cried silently. The children had stopped asking questions. Even they understood that death was coming. Elder Bryn sat with young Kira, the Veltar girl who had asked about humans. Her crystal skin had turned almost gray with fear. "Are you scared?" she whispered to the old Quinn. Bryn nodded honestly. "Yes, child, but sometimes being scared makes us brave." "Will it hurt?" she asked. Before Bryn could answer, every alarm on the station began screaming at once. In the control room, chaos erupted. Sensor readings were going wild, showing impossible energy signatures from deep space. The long-range scanners detected something massive approaching at incredible speed. "What is that?" shouted Vilona over the alarms. Kor's forearms flew across his control panels. "I don't know. The readings don't make sense. Whatever it is, it's moving at 90% of light speed and still accelerating." "That's impossible," said Dr. Lyra. "Nothing can travel that fast in normal space without being torn apart." Vale's communication board lit up like a festival. "Commander, I'm detecting some kind of space distortion 15 million kilometers out. It's like reality is bending." On the main screen, the stars themselves seemed to twist and stretch. Space rippled like water, and something dark began to emerge from the distortion. At first, it looked like a shadow, but as it grew larger, they could see it was a ship. But calling it a ship was like calling a hurricane a breeze. The vessel was enormous, nearly 2 kilometers long and half as wide. Its hull was black as space itself, covered in strange angular patterns that seemed to absorb light. Energy coursed along its surface like captured lightning, and weapon ports dotted its sides like the eyes of some ancient predator. "By the void," whispered Kor. "What is that thing?" The massive ship dropped out of its impossible speed and hung in space like a sleeping giant. For a moment, everything was quiet. Even the Ravager ships seemed stunned by its sudden appearance. Then the newcomers' weapons powered up. The energy readings were beyond anything in their databases. The station's sensors couldn't even measure the power levels they were detecting. It was like trying to count the stars in the sky. A voice came through the communication system. Calm, human, and terrifyingly casual. "Cathara Station, this is Captain Stone of the UHS Retribution. We received your distress call. Maintain safe distance while we clear the area." Vilona's crystal skin flashed through a dozen colors: shock, fear, hope, and disbelief all at once. "UHS Retribution, this is Commander Vilona. Are you here to help us?" "Affirmative, Station. Stay in your current position and keep your shields up. This might get messy." The Ravager fleet finally reacted to the human ship's presence. The biomechanical vessels turned toward the Retribution, their organic weapons charging with malevolent energy. 30 massive warships against one human vessel. The Ravagers opened fire first. Streams of bioplasma erupted from their living cannons, energy beams that could melt through planetary crust. The combined firepower of the entire fleet focused on the human ship, enough destructive force to crack a moon in half. The Retribution's shields absorbed every shot without even flickering. "Interesting," came Captain Stone's voice, still perfectly calm. "Tactical, begin mapping their weapon systems. Science, I want full scans of their biomechanical technology. Let's see what these things are made of." Then the human ship fired back. What happened next defied everything the survivors thought they knew about space combat. The Retribution's weapons didn't just shoot energy beams or missiles, they launched impossibilities. Streams of contained antimatter reached out across space, twisting and bending to follow their targets. When they hit the Ravager ships, entire sections simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed or vaporized, but removed from reality itself. Gravitational warheads exploded near the bioships, creating miniature black holes that crushed their living. Hulls like paper. The Ravagers' regeneration abilities meant nothing against weapons that rewrote the laws of physics. "My God," breathed Dr. Lyra, watching the sensor readings. "Those weapons, they're manipulating space-time itself." But the most terrifying thing wasn't the weapons, it was how the human ship moved. The Retribution danced through space like it weighed nothing, accelerating and turning at speeds that should have liquefied any crew. It seemed to ignore momentum, inertia, and every other law that governed how things moved through the universe. "How are they doing this?" asked Vale, his voice barely a whisper. On the main screen, they watched one of the largest Ravager ships, a bioform the size of a small city, attempt to ram the human vessel. The Retribution simply wasn't there when the collision should have happened. It had moved sideways in a way that hurt to watch, as if it had stepped out of normal space for a moment. The human ship's counterattack was surgical. A single beam of coherent energy struck the Ravager bioform's central nerve cluster. The massive creature convulsed once and went dark, drifting lifeless through space. "Tango down," came a new voice from the Retribution, one of Captain Stone's officers. "That's 5 confirmed kills. Remaining hostiles are attempting to regroup." "Negative," replied Stone. "Don't let them reorganize. Blake, take us through their formation. Harper, target their command ship, the big one with the crown-like projections." "Aye, Captain. Torres, give me full power to forward weapons." The battle, if it could even be called that, continued for another hour. But it wasn't really a battle. It was an extermination. The Ravager ships, apex predators that had consumed entire star systems, found themselves helpless against human technology. Their bioweapons couldn't penetrate the Retribution's shields. Their regeneration meant nothing against weapons that prevented healing. Their superior numbers became a disadvantage as the human ship used their own formation against them. One by one, the Ravager vessels went dark. As the last enemy ship exploded in a burst of biomechanical gore, the survivors on Cathara station sat in stunned silence. They had just witnessed the impossible, a single human warship destroying an entire fleet that could have cracked planets. "All clear, Cathara station," came Captain Stone's voice. "Threat neutralized. We'll remain in system for 48 hours to ensure no stragglers return." Commander Valona found her voice somehow. "Captain Stone, thank you. We owe you our lives." "No thanks necessary," Stone replied, his tone becoming colder. The Ravagers were a threat to human interest in this sector. This was not altruism. Something about those words sent a chill through everyone listening. They had been saved, but the way Stone said it made them wonder exactly why. The silence after the battle was more terrifying than the fighting itself. Where 30 Ravager warships had floated like living nightmares, now there was only empty space and drifting debris. The UHS Retribution hung motionless among the wreckage, its black hull gleaming with contained energy. Commander Valona stared at the main screen, trying to process what she had just witnessed. In 2 hours, a single human ship had completely destroyed a fleet that could have wiped out entire star systems. "Commander," whispered Communications Officer Vale. "I'm detecting 2 more ships decloaking near the asteroid field." The sensors showed 2 more human vessels materializing out of nothingness. They had been there all along, invisible and waiting. The first was sleek and deadly, the UHS Vengeance, a destroyer that moved like a hunting cat. The second was smaller but somehow more menacing, the UHS Fury, a corvette that radiated controlled violence. "They were watching," breathed Dr. Lyra. "The whole time they were watching." Captain Stone's voice came through the communicator, calm as always. "Station Command, this is Stone. We're conducting post-battle analysis. Maintain your current position." "Captain," Valona replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "How long have your ships been in this system?" There was a pause. When Stone answered, his tone was different, colder, more clinical. "Long enough, Commander. Long enough." In the emergency shelters, people were celebrating. Children laughed and cried at the same time. Families hugged each other, unable to believe they were still alive. But the older residents, those who had heard the stories about humans, were quieter. They understood that being saved by humans came with a price. Elder Bryn sat in Shelter 7, watching young Kira dance with joy. Her crystal skin was bright with happiness, but Bryn's old eyes were worried. "Why aren't you celebrating?" asked Kira, noticing his expression. "Child," Bryn said gently, "when wolves save sheep from other wolves, the sheep must ask themselves, what do the wolves want in return?" Back in the control room, the command staff was analyzing the battle recordings. What they discovered made their relief turn to unease. "Look at this," said Kor, his forearms working multiple displays. The human weapons didn't just destroy the Ravager ships. They prevented them from sending any signals back to their fleet. Dr. Lyra studied the energy patterns. "These reading, the humans were jamming all subspace communications before they even fired their first shot. The Ravagers couldn't call for help or report what they found here." "Why would that matter?" asked Vale. "Because," said Valona slowly, "it means this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a trap." The truth began to emerge as they studied the sensor logs. The human ships had been positioned in the system for days, maybe weeks. They had watched the Ravagers arrive. They had watched the siege begin. They had waited while 50,000 people lived in terror, wondering if they would die. "They used us as bait," whispered Vale. Captain Stone's communication channel crackled to life again. This time, they could hear other voices in the background, his crew coordinating their activities. "Blake, what's the status on the biosamples?" Stone asked. "Collected and secured, Captain," came a female voice. "Dr. Torres is already running analysis on their regeneration systems." "Good. Harper, I want full scans of their weapon technology. This was our best chance to study Ravager capabilities in live combat." "Already on it, sir." The way they adapted their bioplasma to different shield frequencies was fascinating. The people on Cathara Station listened to this exchange with growing horror. The humans were talking about the battle like it was a scientific experiment. They had turned a life or death struggle into a research opportunity. "Captain Stone?" Valona called out, her crystal skin flashing angry red. "Are you saying you deliberately let the Ravagers attack us?" Another pause. When Stone replied, his voice held no emotion at all. "Commander, the Ravagers have been a problem. For human expansion in this sector, we needed to understand their capabilities and weaknesses. Your distress situation provided an excellent testing ground." "Testing ground?" Valona's voice rose. 50,000 people could have died. "But they didn't," Stone replied matter-of-factly. "We calculated acceptable risk levels and determined the probability of station survival until our intervention. The math worked out. In engineering, Kor was studying the human ship's combat performance. What he found made his forearms tremble. "These readings can't be right," he muttered. "What is it?" asked his assistant. "The human ship," Kor said slowly. "During the battle, it was pulling G-forces that should have killed everyone aboard. No biological creature can survive those acceleration levels. He pulled up more data. And look at this. When that Ravager ship tried to ram them, the Retribution moved in a way that violates basic physics. It's like they stepped outside normal space-time. The assistant studied the readings. Maybe their artificial gravity technology is more advanced than we thought? No, Core shook his head. This is something else. Something impossible. Meanwhile, the human ships continued their post-battle activities. Scanner sweeps revealed they were collecting every piece of Ravager debris, analyzing the biomechanical technology, and studying the aliens' tactics and weaknesses. Dr. Lyra monitored their communications, growing more disturbed by what she heard. Subject 7 shows interesting adaptation patterns, came Dr. Torres's voice from the Retribution. The biohull tried to evolve resistance to our antimatter weapons in real time. Noted, replied Stone. That confirms the intelligence reports about their rapid adaptation abilities. We'll need to account for that in future engagements. Future engagements? Lyra whispered to herself. The conversation continued. Captain, I'm reading similar biomechanical signatures from 12 other systems in this sector, reported Officer Harper. If the Ravagers follow standard pack hunting behavior, those systems are likely next on their list. Excellent, Stone replied. Prepare course calculations for all 12 locations. We'll set up monitoring stations and wait for the next attack. Wait for the next attack? Velona repeated, having overheard the transmission. Captain, you could warn those systems. You could save them. Negative, Commander. Stone's voice was ice cold. Those systems will provide additional research opportunities. We need more data on Ravager attack patterns and defensive adaptations. The full horror of the situation hit everyone at once. The humans weren't heroes who had come to save them. They were scientists who had turned an entire sector of space into their personal laboratory. They would let the Ravagers attack system after system, using the suffering of innocent people to gather information. You're monsters, Velona whispered. We're pragmatists, Stone corrected. The Ravagers are a threat to human expansion. Understanding them completely is worth any temporary suffering by non-human populations. In the shelters, word was spreading about what the humans really were. The celebration stopped. Parents held their children closer, understanding that while they had been saved from one nightmare, they might have fallen into another. Elder Bryn looked at young Kira, who was no longer dancing. What's wrong? She asked, sensing the change in mood. Nothing, child. Bryn lied. Just be grateful we're alive. But as he said it, he wondered if being alive under human protection was really something to be grateful for. The wolves had saved them from other wolves, but now the sheep belonged to the pack. The next 48 hours passed like a fever dream. The 3 human ships remained in the system, their dark hulls floating silently among the debris of the Ravager fleet. On Cathara Station, life slowly returned to normal, but everything had changed. Commander Velona stood in her office, staring out at the human vessels. Her crystal skin flickered between colors, relief, anger, fear, and something else she couldn't name. They were alive, but at what cost? Dr. Lyra knocked on her door and entered without waiting for permission. Her Quinn features were drawn with exhaustion and worry. Commander, I've been analyzing the human communication logs, she said, setting down a data pad. What I found, you need to see this. Velona picked up the pad and read silently. Her skin went pale crystal white. They've been tracking the Ravager fleet for 6 months, she whispered. They knew exactly when and where the attack would happen. That's not the worst part, Lyra continued. Look at page 3. Velona scrolled down and found a detailed analysis of Cathara Station, population numbers, defensive capabilities, estimated survival time under siege. The humans had calculated everything down to the hour. They knew we would last exactly 71 hours and 43 minutes, Velona read aloud. Margin of error, plus or minus 2 hours. They let us suffer for exactly the right amount of time, Lyra said bitterly. Long enough to gather maximum data on Ravager psychological warfare, but not long enough for us to actually die. In the engineering section, Core was making his own disturbing discoveries. His forearms worked frantically over a technical analysis that made no sense. "Impossible," he muttered for the 100th time. "This is completely impossible." His assistant, a young Thek named Nex, looked over his shoulder. "What did you find now?" "The human ship's performance during the battle," Kor explained. "I've run the calculations a dozen times. The acceleration forces they sustained should have turned their crew into liquid. But they were talking calmly throughout the entire fight. Maybe they have better inertial dampeners than we thought." Kor shook his head. "No technology can overcome basic physics like this. Unless—" He paused, a horrible thought forming. "Unless they're not entirely biological anymore." The words hung in the air like a curse. Everyone had heard rumors about human augmentation, about soldiers who had replaced parts of themselves with machines. But to survive what the Retribution had done, they would need to be more machine than flesh. "What kind of people do that to themselves?" whispered Nex. "The kind who value victory over everything else," Kor replied. Meanwhile, in the emergency shelters, Elder Bryn was telling the children a different kind of story. Young Kira and the others sat in a circle listening to his old voice with wide eyes. "Long ago," Bryn began, "there was a village that lived in fear of wolves. Every night the wolves would come and take someone away. The villagers prayed for salvation." "Did it come?" asked Kira. "Yes," Bryn nodded. "A pack of even stronger wolves arrived. They drove away the first wolves and saved the village." "That's good, right?" said a young Thek boy. "The stronger wolves told the villagers they were now safe," Bryn continued. "But they also said the village now belonged to them. The villagers could live and work, but only as long as they served their new masters." "Were the villagers happy?" asked Kira. Bryn looked at her with sad, ancient eyes. "They were alive, child. Sometimes that has to be enough." Captain Stone's voice suddenly echoed through the station's communication system. "Attention, Cathara Station. This is Captain Stone of the UHS Retribution. I'm addressing all residents." Everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. In the control room, Velona activated the station-wide broadcast so every person could hear. "The ravager threat to this system has been eliminated," Stone announced. "However, our analysis indicates this sector remains unstable. Additional threats may emerge." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a weight that made everyone shiver. "Therefore, this sector is now under informal human protection. Any future threats will be dealt with by human forces. In exchange, we expect full cooperation with our research and security operations." "What does that mean?" whispered someone in the crowd that had gathered in the main corridor. Stone continued as if he had heard the question. "Cathara Station will serve as a monitoring post for this region. You will report any unusual activity to human forces immediately. You will provide assistance to human research teams when requested. You will not interfere with human operations." Commander Velona activated her communication link. "Captain Stone, are you saying we no longer have autonomy over our own station?" "You have the autonomy to choose," Stone replied coldly. "Accept human protection and live under our terms, or reject it and face whatever threats emerge from the dark on your own." It wasn't really a choice, and everyone knew it. Without human protection, the next Ravager fleet would consume them all. With it, they became subjects of a power they didn't understand and couldn't resist. "We understand," Velona said quietly. "Excellent," Stone replied. "Human research teams will arrive within the month. You will provide them with full access to your facilities and complete cooperation with their studies." The transmission ended, leaving the station in heavy silence. Dr. Lyra found Velona in her office an hour later, staring out at the stars. "Commander, what have we done?" "What we had to do," Velona replied. "We're alive. Our families are alive. Our children will grow up." "But what kind of life will they have?" Lyra asked. "What kind of future are we giving them?" Before Velona could answer, the human ships began to move. The UHS Vengeance and UHS Fury disappeared first, simply vanishing. As their cloaking systems engaged, the massive Retribution hung in space for a moment longer like a dark promise, then jumped to faster-than-light speed in a burst of twisted spacetime. They were gone, but their presence remained like a shadow over the station. In the days that followed, life on Cathara Station slowly returned to normal. The mines reopened. Trade resumed. Children went back to school. But everyone understood that their world had changed forever. They were no longer free. They were protected. Young Kira found Elder Bryn in the observation deck a week later, looking out at the stars. "Are you still scared?" she asked. Bryn considered the question carefully. "No, child, I'm not scared anymore." "Good," she smiled. "But I'm not happy either," he continued gently. "When you're no longer afraid of the dark, it's often because something darker is watching over you." Kira looked puzzled, too young to understand the full meaning of his words. "Will the humans come back?" she asked. Bryn nodded slowly. "They'll always come back now. That's what protection means." As he spoke, the long-range sensors detected a brief energy signature at the edge of the system. Probably a cloaked human ship, watching and waiting. The Guardians were still there, invisible but present. The people of Cathara Station were safe. They would always be safe now. They just had to remember never to ask what that safety would cost them in the end.